Hi, I'm Diana Montford, the world's first transgender television journalist, born male, became female. We have our annual Day of Remembrance show now, where we read the names of trans people who were murdered. My guest is Ms. Julie Grey-owens, who compiled the list and wrote everything we will show you and tell you. Ms. Tanya Walker, who is a world-famous trans activist. You've seen her on Fox News, on ABC, NBC, CBS, I don't know, everything. You've seen her everywhere. And she's the go-to person when the news media wants to understand what the transgender experience is about. And I should point out that while we have 24 names of trans people who were killed here in the U.S., this is by no means a complete list. Many trans folk who are murdered, their murders are never reported, their bodies are never found, or they are misgendered. In other words, if a trans woman is murdered, they will say, you know, Mr. So-and-so, they'll use her boy name. If a trans man is murdered, you know, Miss So-and-so, and that's the way it is. But we are going to do honor to our fallen siblings in transhood, and, you know, I mean, we have to take the bad with the good. So, okay. Julie, don't you have something?
Yeah, I'd like to do a little bit of an introduction for the Transgender Day of Remembrance. The Transgender Day of Remembrance was set aside to memorialize those who were killed due to anti-transgender hate or prejudice. The event is held in November to honor Rita Hester, whose murder on November 28, 1998, kicked off the Remembering Our Dead web project and a San Francisco candlelight vigil in 1999. Rita Hester's murder, like most anti-transgender murder cases, has yet to be solved. Although not every person represented during the Day of Remembrance self-identified as transgender, that is, a person whose personal identity does not match the sex assigned them at birth. Each victim was a victim of violence based on bias against transgender and non-binary people. The Transgender Day of Remembrance serves several purposes. First, it raises public awareness of hate crimes against transgender people, an action that current media really doesn't perform. It publicly mourns and honors the lives of our community members who might otherwise be forgotten. Through the vigil, we express love and respect for our people in the face of national indifference and hatred. And it also reminds cisgender people, people whose personal identity matches the sex assigned them at birth, that we are their children, their parents, their friends, co-workers, and lovers. The Day of Remembrance gives our allies a chance to step forward with us and stand in vigil, memorializing those of us who've died by anti-transgender violence. Okay.
It is important to note that transgender homicide victims are often misgendered by local media, law enforcement, or their own families after their deaths, or they may not be out as trans at all. Misgendering is when a person is referred to by any pronouns other than the ones they prefer. The victims may also be dead named. When a transgender person is referred to by the name they no longer use. The result is that the real number of trans homicide victims each year is far higher than reports suggest.
And now the list. Number 1, Crystal Steele Newzelian. Is that the way it's pronounced? 42, age 42, of North Adams, Massachusetts. The founder of the Miss Trans America and Miss Trans New England pageants, was stabbed to death at her home January 5th. Her husband, Mark S. Steele Newzelian, 47, has been charged with her murder. He turned himself into police the same night, saying he had done something, quote, very bad, end quote, and describing details of the crime. But he pleaded not guilty the following week in Northern Berkshire District Court. He is awaiting trial.
Vicki Gutierrez, 33, Los Angeles, California. The immigrant from Honduras was stabbed to death at her home on January 10th. Firefighters were called. A fire at the building earlier that day discovered her body. Gutierrez was active in the LA trans community, working with the Los Angeles LGBT Center on Transgender Day of Remembrance events. A few days after her death, Los Angeles police arrested Kevin Ramirez, 29. Police said he admitted to stabbing Gutierrez and setting the fire. He is charged with murder during the commission of an attempted robbery, plus 2 counts of arson, while police continued to try to determine his motive and whether the murder was a hate crime.
Zachariah Fry, 28, Albuquerque, New Mexico. On January 18th, Fry went missing from her home along with her housemate, Eugene Carroll Ray, who's 70 years old. Their bodies were found February 19th in a trash bin in a rural part of New Mexico. Both had died of blunt force trauma to the head and face. It is not clear exactly when they were killed. Albuquerque police arrested Charles Anthony Speece, 27 years old, and charged him with the murder of both Fry and Ray, along with the charge of tampering with evidence. Police say he may have lived with the victims for a time.
Number 4, Selene Walker. No relation to Tanya, of course. Selene Walker, age 36, Jacksonville, Florida. Found shot to death in her hotel room on February 4th. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office misgendered and dead-named her when reporting her death, with officials saying they do not identify people as transgender. Activists have called for a change in the policy, which may have delayed the investigation of the crime. No one has been arrested for her murder yet, and police have revealed no details of this investigation. Some friends suspect her murder was an anti-trans hate crime.
Tanya Harvey, 35, Buffalo, New York, fatally shot on a dead-end street on February 6th. Police and Erie County District Attorney's Office are continuing to investigate her murder, including the possibility that it was a hate crime. Activists pointed out the widespread violence against trans people. There is a very real epidemic of violence targeting the transgender community, particularly those who live at the intersection of transphobia, racism, and misogyny. Damian Mordecall, executive director of the Pride Center of Western New York, told the Buffalo News.
Felicia Mitchell, 45, Cleveland, Ohio, died February 23rd after being shot in the chest outside her home. In April, Cleveland police issued a warrant for the arrest of Gary Lamar Sanders, 36, in connection with Mitchell's death. He was placed on Ohio's most wanted list and was finally apprehended by U.S. Marshals in July in West Virginia, where he's been living for more than a month. He is charged with aggravated murder.
Number 7, Amia Turay Barrowman, age 28, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Found shot to death at a motel in Baton Rouge on March 26th. Police so far have no suspects and are continuing to investigate. Barrowman's family declined to speak to the media.
Carla Patricia Flores Pavon, 26, Dallas, Texas, found strangled to death in her apartment on May 9th. Police found her unconscious and she was pronounced dead at a local hospital. A witness reportedly saw a man fleeing the scene. Dallas police said they do not believe her death was a hate crime. Police arrested a suspect in Flores Pavon's murder, Jimmy Eugene Johnson II, 24, near Huntsville, Texas, on May 17th. Johnson was arrested during a traffic stop and had items from Flores Pavon's apartment in his car, so police believe this motive was robbery and not anti-transgender bias. He is charged with murder.
Sasha Wall, 29, Pageland, South Carolina, found shot to death in her car along a rural road in Chesterfield County, South Carolina, the morning of April 1st. She had been shot several times in the neck and shoulder. Police believe she knew her killer and that her death was likely the result of a domestic dispute.
Nino Fortson, 36-year-old transgender man Atlanta, Georgia. This, of course, proves that it's not only transgender women who are murdered, transgender men and non-binary persons are also murdered. Anyway, Nino Fortson, 36-year-old transgender man, Atlanta, Georgia. Shot to death in Atlanta on May 13th. Fortson was involved in an argument with 2 men and 2 women on the street. A witness said he fired a small gun into the air, but then walked away. A few minutes later, the witness heard more gunshots and then saw him lying on the ground, as one of the other people involved in the dispute limped away. Fortson died shortly afterward at Grady Memorial Hospital. Initial media reports misgendered Fortson, which was called out by friends and allies to the social media. The Atlanta Police Department responded with this statement, quote, "Our preliminary investigation did not in any way indicate that this individual identified as transgender, and we have no evidence at all that such an identification played any role in this death. But given the issues that have been raised publicly, we have engaged our LGBT liaison and asked them to work with our homicide unit to see if there are any angles that need to be explored," end quote.
Gigi Pierce, 28, Boise, Idaho. Shot to death in Portland, Oregon on the night of May 21st. Sophia Grace Adler, 33, has been arrested and charged with Pierce's murder. Adler has pleaded not guilty. Witnesses and police said there had been an altercation between the two prior to the shooting.
Roxana Hernandez, 33, Honduras. On May 25th, Hernandez passed away while in custody of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement after fleeing violence and discrimination in Honduras. In April, she told BuzzFeed News that she'd fled her home country of Honduras after being sexually assaulted by MS-13 gang members. Her quote was, "4 of them raped me, and as a result, I got HIV. Trans people in my neighborhood are killed and chopped into pieces and then dumped inside potato bags." As part of the caravan of asylum seekers from Central America, Hernandez crossed into the United States on May 9th through a border between San Diego and Tijuana. She was immediately processed for expedited removal, which means she wasn't allowed to see an immigration judge before being deported. On May 16th, ICE sent her to the Cibola County Detention Center in New Mexico for detainment, where its only unit for transgender detainees is located. Some migrant rights advocates claim that the facility's rural location prevents asylum seekers from acquiring legal assistance. Hernandez's health took a drastic turn for the worse before she was set to leave the country. The day after reaching the detention center, she was admitted to a hospital with symptoms of pneumonia and other complications. She was transferred to an intensive care unit later that day and died there just over a week later.
Antasha English, 38, Jacksonville, Florida. Shot to death on a city street on June 1st. She was shot in the abdomen by someone firing from a vehicle and died at a local hospital. Police are continuing to investigate her murder.
Diamond Stevens, 39, Meridian, Mississippi. Shot to death June 18th while driving home. She was shot in the back of the head, causing her van to crash into a house. She was not identified as transgender until a month later because police and local news outlets misgendered and dead-named her. Police, who have yet to identify a suspect, say there may have been others in the car with her.
Catalina Christina James, 24, Bishopville, South Carolina. James was the 3rd transgender woman murdered in Jacksonville, Florida this year, leading some to suspect a serial killer is at work. James was shot to death outside a Quality Inn and Suites motel on June 24th. The Jacksonville Sheriff's Office continued its practice of not using the transgender victim's preferred name.
Keisha Wells, 58, Cleveland, Ohio. Found dead in the parking lot of an apartment complex on June 24th in Cleveland. Wells was the 2nd trans woman murdered in the city this year. She had suffered a gunshot wound to the abdomen. Police found 11 bullet casings at the crime scene and are continuing to investigate.
Just see some LAR 30, Jacksonville, Florida. On July 19th, the genderqueer victim was found stabbed to death in Jacksonville, Florida. This was the 4th murder of a gender-expansive person in Jacksonville this year.
Sasha Garden, 27, Orlando, Florida. Found dead in an Orlando apartment complex on July 19th. Garden, who was an advocate for transgender women and an outreach specialist for HIV and AIDS organization, was in the process of saving money to transition and become a hairstylist.
Dejanay Stanton, 24, Chicago, Illinois. Shot to death early in the morning of August 30th on the south side of Chicago. She was found in an alley with a gunshot wound to her head and pronounced dead at a nearby hospital. Police initially did not know her name and identified her as Jane Doe, but friends who saw her photo on social media confirmed her identity.
Von Tasha Bell, 18, of Shreveport, Louisiana, suffered a fatal gunshot wound August 30th in Shreveport, Louisiana. She was found on the street early that morning and pronounced dead at a local hospital. Police and media misgendered her, but a Louisiana activist organization identified her correctly. Bell's death is a reminder of the current climate and national discourse on trans issues, said the release from the Louisiana Trans Advocates. Dehumanizing language, actions lower the barriers to this kind of senseless violence. The group called on the city and state officials to condemn anti-trans discrimination and violence and to work against institutional racism. Police have yet to make an arrest, but have asked the public for help in identifying a suspect.
Shanti Tucker, 30, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Shot to death September 5th on a Philadelphia street by someone firing from inside a pickup truck. Witnesses had seen her arguing with the person in the truck just before she was shot, and police believe she knew her killer. The police also said they don't think the attack was motivated by her gender identity, but her friends and trans activists don't agree. Philadelphia police are seeking the public's help in finding her killer.
London Moore, 20, Port Charlotte, Florida. Found shot to death on September 8th in Northport, Florida. Her car was found the next day at a different location. Police said the crime was an isolated incident and that they believe she knew her killer, who remains at large. Activists say Moore's death should be investigated as a hate crime. Police are saying that they are reserving judgment but have not ruled out that possibility.
Nikki Enriquez, 28, Laredo, Texas, found dead near Interstate 35 in South Texas, September 15th. She has been shot in the head. Juan David Ortiz, 35, an intelligence supervisor for the U.S. Border Patrol, is charged with murdering Enriquez and 3 other women. Police and prosecutors are calling the murders a serial killing spree in which Ortiz singled out sex workers. They have not ruled out the possibility that there are other victims. At this time, Enriquez is the only known transgender victim.
Ciara Minaj Carter Frazier, 31, Chicago, Illinois. Stabbed to death in Chicago on the night of October 3rd. She was found in the backyard of an abandoned house and pronounced dead at the scene. Police believe her killer was a man she had been arguing with at the house, but they have yet to apprehend him. Her death came just over a month after the fatal shooting of a transgender Chicagoan, Dee Stanton.
Okay. Well, and there you have it. This is by no means a complete list. There is no such thing as a complete list, as we've said earlier. It's very difficult to know how many transgender folk are murdered each year because so many murders go unreported, so many are misgendered, and some are even murdered by the police. So naturally they're not going to investigate. So what do we make of all this? Is there a positive anything in this?
There's no positive in any of this. If you want to look for any kind of positivity out of this memorial, it's the fact that all around the United States, as well as around the world, memorials will be held in public places, and cisgender people will stand in alliance with our community. I always think on Long Island, we have it so that cisgender people do the reading of the names. And when you have to read the names and you see some of the ways that these people are brutalized, I think it has an impact on people, and I think it has an important impact on people. It's very hard for cisgender people to understand the world that we live in and our life experiences. Mm-hmm. And this just may bring a little clarity to, their thoughts and the way they treat us.
So many trans folk are murdered in such a Baroque, Manson family-like way that there's real hatred and violence there. It's not just murder like a crime of passion. It's like a truly sadistic, horrific murder.
It's called overkill. And overkill is defined as, if you want to kill someone, you get a gun, bang, you're dead, it's all over. Yes. But overkill is when...
bang, 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 bang.
Right. We literally destroy your body so that we send a message, not only to you, obviously, but to anyone around that, watch out. You're all
Why do they hate us so much? What have we done?
Well, that's the biggest question about transphobia. It's an irrational feeling because a lot of times we've done nothing. There's no reason for the hate. But part of it is, obviously, religion's a part of it. Mm-hmm. There are still religions in the United States
Leviticus
that do not agree with our lifestyle, which is not a lifestyle, obviously.
Well, and when even the president, recently, President Trump said that he was going to redefine the definition of gender to do away with transgender folk, Laverne Cox countered with her own tweet that said, "We exist, we always have, and always will."
And they've erased us from government websites. And when I look at this paper, I noticed that several of the girls were murdered, and there was a robbery took place, and they found the evidence of the murdered trans woman or victim on the killer, when they caught them. So,
well, I think one important thing that we have to point out is that for the most part, almost all of the names were transgender women of color. This is the one part of our community that is just being attacked so out in the open. Mm-hmm. And this is something that we all members of our community, as well as our allies, have to speak out about. Mm-hmm. So this is, unfortunately, a very sad part of it, but it is something that has to be stated and made clear.
And that, of course, is, racism taken to the nth degree, mm-hmm. which is horrifying. Do you find, as a woman of color and a trans woman, that perhaps you are treated less well than a white trans woman would be?
Of course, yes, of course. We're not treated as well. We're not even by our own race, we're not treated that good. Because people like to use religious dogma for a reason to hate you in society.
Speaking of hatred and racism, you're wearing a button picturing the late, great Marsha P. Johnson, P standing for Pay It No Mind. I knew her. She was very nice, and she was one of the original Stonewall Rebellion people who that first night and continuing nights just wouldn't take it anymore. She was mad as hell, and she wouldn't take it anymore. And she and Sylvia Rivera later in 1971 founded STAR, Street Transvestites Action something or other, which sounds as though I'm indifferent, but, I was 15 years old then and not in the thick of, a revolution. But just, doing my eye makeup, that's it. And I finally finished it an hour ago. So. But anyway, a little levity, very little. But anyway, okay. So, how can people protect themselves? Do you have any idea? So many of these crimes were domestic violence crimes, or just people who knew you and then killed you because somehow you are less valuable than a cisgender straight person.
Well, I think the hate behind it sometimes is cisgender men having issues with their own gender. And a lot of, I think, crimes are based on that. Recently, we did a demonstration in front of the Senate Majority Leader for New York State, his office, in June. And we had some young white men.
What's his name?
John Flanagan?
Okay.
Senator John Flanagan, yes, the Majority Leader. Anyway, we were out demonstrating in front of his office. And a pickup truck with two white males drove by and saluted us with the single finger and shouted some swear words at us, and then turned around and had to drive past us a second time to do the same thing again and drive by us one more time to do. Now, I don't know where they were headed. Maybe they were out to pick up their beer or something, but they had to go out of their way.
There was a sale at 7-Eleven.
Right, yeah, to make sure that we knew that, they had issues with us.
And that says so much more about these men than it does about us. Anyway, today's antagonist is tomorrow's sister, maybe, for all we know.
We'll see.
But this is
we only have a minute. So,
yeah.
Which is maybe fortunate, given all we could say about so many.
Yeah.
Anyway, this has been the Day of Remembrance 2018.
Yeah.
This list and the accompanying text were written by Julie Grey-Owens, transgender activist and founder of
Gender Equality.
Gender Equality, New York.
Let her say it.
Yes.
You'll get your turn. Okay. Tanya Walker. Now you should answer for her. Famous trans activist, Army veteran, founder of?
Co-founder of New York Transgender Advocacy Group.
Okay. And I am Diana Montford. I founded nothing. I once found $1 in the street. That doesn't count. Anyway, but I've been doing this show since 1990. Yeah, whatever. I love you a lot. If you're trans, I love you a lot. If you're cisgender, I love you a lot. Take good care of yourself. I love you a lot. We all love you a lot.